Good morning, Brew Daily show. I'm Neal Freyman.
And I'm Toby Howell.
Today, Warren Buffett sells even more Apple stock. Did someone leave him out of the group chat?
Then TGI Fridays has a case of the Mondays. The potato skin purveyor officially filed for bankruptcy. It's Monday, November 4th. Let's ride.
Good morning and happy Monday. We've got a huge week in store, but our sense of time has been thrown out of whack. Daylight saving time ended early Sunday morning, giving most Americans an extra hour of sleep, more darkness in the evenings, and absolute chaos among the household appliances. My phone says one time, the oven clock says another. You know, Toby, I'm one of those people where if I don't fix the oven clock within 24 hours of the time change, I just leave it until March.
The problem is that it's not just your oven anymore. All of our appliances are smart these days. So your fridge, your coffee maker, your microwave, your toilet might all be saying different things at this point. Still, no one is as confused as your pets right now. Dogs don't know about daylight savings. All they know is they're getting walked at a different time. Cats can't read a clock, so they're sitting there wondering why they're getting fed later. Kids as well have no idea what's going on. So every time you're confused, just think about how the pets and the babies are feeling. Now a word from our new sponsor, but an old friend, Yahoo Finance. Neal, our purple prince is back.
Back and better than ever, too. It's still the best place on the internet to keep your finger on the pulse of the market, but with even more features for people who like to dig a little deeper.
Right. If you're someone who relies on your friend from college to tip you off on new stocks to buy, maybe try out Yahoo Finance instead. They have this premium feature called Investment Ideas that does the hard work for you, giving you price targets, outlooks, and ratings backed by detailed research reports.
Way better than listening to Josh from your freshman year dorm.
If you want to finally lose Josh's number and become the friend who everyone goes to for advice, head to yahoofinance.com for more.
So, you know, Election Day tomorrow is going to decide the next president of the United States. But remember, it's not just about the White House. Americans are also going to be choosing which party controls the country's legislative chambers, the Senate and the House of Representatives. The battle for Congress was underscored on Saturday when GOP House Speaker Mike Johnson said that his party would probably roll back the CHIPS and Science Act, the bipartisan 2022 law that set aside $53 billion to companies producing semiconductors. Johnson quickly walked those comments back and said the CHIPS Act is not on the agenda for repeal. Important context, he made the remark in a New York district that is receiving a new $100 billion Micron chip plant because of the CHIPS Act. The brief dust-up highlights the stakes in this election for the next president's economic policy agenda. Will Kamala Harris or Donald Trump face an oppositional Congress that blunts their ability to implement their plans, or a friendly, cooperative one?
And in recent decades, it's always been a friendly one. No incoming president has taken office without their party's control of the House and Senate since George H.W. Bush in 1989. And that's allowed them to enact signature legislation early into their terms. For instance, former President Trump's tax cuts in 2017 and President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act in 2022. So tomorrow's election will determine whether there's a united force in power in D.C. or a divided government. And trillions of dollars are on the line.
I know, Toby. As you know from Schoolhouse Rock, only Congress can make changes to the U.S. tax code, and there will be changes coming next year. Control of Congress is going to determine the fate of trillions of dollars of tax cuts, Trump's tax cuts that you mentioned from 2017. A big chunk of them are going to expire. Trump wants to extend them, and Kamala Harris wants to keep them for the middle class, raise taxes on the wealthy, and corporations boost that corporate tax rate up from 21% to 28%. They can't do any of that without Congress. Congress is the only body that can change the tax code. There's a $2.3 trillion gap between their tax plans. So it really depends on which party controls Congress, whether there is that united force. There's all Democrats or all Republicans from the White House on down to make these particular tax code changes. Also for Kamala Harris, she has a lot of economic policy ideas that couldn't be done without Congress. I'm thinking those subsidies for first-time home buyers, that $6,000 tax credit for parents with newborns. Those would not be able to happen. She'd have to compromise if there were a Republican Senate or Congress.
Interestingly enough, though, Trump's big signature economic proposal, which we've talked about a lot, is higher tariffs just across the board. Coincidentally, though, you don't need congressional approval to enact tariffs like that. So maybe Trump doesn't need Congress to be as favorable or as united as potentially Kamala Harris would going in, because his big thing that he's just been sprouting from the rooftops is that he wants to enact these across-the-board tariffs, which do not need congressional approval.
So where does the race stand? Looks like the math is pretty tough for Democrats in the Senate. They do currently control the Senate, but just the way the math works out with how many seats they're defending and the way the tide is turning, it looks like there is a probability that they will lose the Senate. Meanwhile, the House is a complete toss-up. It's going to depend on those New York districts that are getting the Micron chips and other beneficiaries of the CHIPS Act, as well as some swing districts in California. So that will be absolutely something close to watch. Let's get to some other election-related headlines from the weekend. First up, CEOs seem to be sweating this election cycle more than any other, and it's showing up on conference calls this earnings season. The word election has come up on 100 earnings calls of S&P 500 companies between September 15th and October 31st. The most mentioning the word during that time frame back to 2004. There's just so much uncertainty in boardrooms across America.
Yeah, and one thing the market does not like is uncertainty, unpredictability. So you're seeing all sorts of companies maybe trying to rein in hiring a bit, maybe putting pause on some of those major infrastructure or industrial projects, because you just don't know what lies ahead. I mean, we literally said there's a $2.3 trillion gap between the tax plans of the two candidates. So that is why you're seeing, I would also love to see a counter of mentions of the word uncertainty or unpredictability or just general trepidation that these CEOs are feeling right now. And we're seeing it manifested in just the amount of times that they are saying the word election and referencing election on these earnings calls.
Next, for all those election investors out there, which is something I haven't said before the 2024 election, you might have noticed a change on prediction markets. Harris has narrowed Trump's lead significantly. For instance, last week on the platform Kalshi, Trump boasted 64% odds of winning the White House. As of last night, Kalshi showed 52% Trump and 48% Harris. That change was fueled in part by a shock poll in Iowa on Saturday night. A highly regarded pollster named Ann Seltzer showed Harris leading Trump in Iowa, a potential outcome that no one, not even the campaigns, had thought possible. The poll is certainly an outlier. Other polls showed Trump with a big lead in the state, but it definitely has caused some investors to switch up their calculus.
Right. You can point to any number of things, maybe the fallout after the Madison Square Garden rally and the Puerto Rico joke, this new Iowa poll, for the reason why the prediction markets are converging. But maybe the most simple explanation is there was this huge delta between what the prediction markets were showing and how close of an election the polls are kind of forecasting it to be. So, of course, there is maybe some potential money to be made by taking Harris at numbers that a lot of people thought were undervaluing her actual chances of winning the election. So, could just be a delta, could just be maybe these poly market whales, maybe these Kalshi whales are just trying to cash out on their positions now. But it is startling to look at just how quickly, it was over a matter of hours and days, that they completely converged and now are showing a tighter race than they have previously.
Here's another election stat that might explain why you can't watch TV anymore. There has been nearly $1 billion spent on political ads in the last week alone, according to Ad Impact. To put that in perspective, it took just 7 days to spend 1/10 of the $10 billion in total that's been spent on ads since the start of 2023.
That is mind-boggling. I was thinking, how could you possibly spend $1 billion in 7 days? But then you start thinking a little bit. I mean, Kamala Harris rented out a day on the Sphere. Her campaign put a picture of her up on there. Cost $450,000 a day to advertise there. But also, just think about all the channels and all the different places you can spend money to advertise at this point. YouTube, Facebook, Snapchat has become a really big channel as well. Back in the day, there were like 4 major TV networks in the US, so you quite simply could not spend this much. Now it is much easier to spend $1 billion.
Finally, on election day, you're not only going to get democracy, you're also going to get some free stuff. Some brands are running promotions to help you vote and satisfy your sweet tooth. Krispy Kreme, for instance, is giving out 1 free glazed donut per person, and you don't even need to show proof that you voted. The rideshare apps are also getting in on the election game. Both Uber and Lyft are offering 50% off rides for people heading to their voting stations, plus another $10 off if you go through their official voting platform. Meanwhile, check in with your company if you're getting PTO for voting tomorrow. According to the SHRM Employee Benefits Survey, half of employers say they've offered paid time off to vote.
What is funny about these freebies that these companies are giving away is that it's technically illegal under federal election law to provide incentives to vote. The law has seemingly kind of overlooked these companies for a long time. One of the ways that you can get around it is what Krispy Kreme is doing. They're saying you don't even actually need to show proof of voting. They'll just take you at your word because as federal law states, you cannot incentivize people to go out to the polls and vote. So it's this weird legal gray area where probably you're not going to get in trouble for giving away a free donut, but technically by letter of the law, it is not legal to incentivize people to go out and vote. All right, let's move on. Warren Buffett's primary physician, cover your ears because he is not following your advice that an apple a day keeps a doctor away. Berkshire Hathaway's third quarter earnings reports revealed that Buffett used this past quarter to once again trim his biggest positions, most notably in Apple. He dumped about a quarter of his stake in the world's biggest company, making it 4 quarters in a row that Berkshire was a seller of Apple. But what happens when you sell a stock? You get some cash, and boy, does Berkshire Hathaway have a lot of it. Like Smaug from Lord of the Rings, Buffett and co. are now sitting on a mind-boggling $325 billion in dry powder. That is up from $277 billion last quarter. Now, when you see the OG value investor being a net seller this many quarters in a row, it has to make you a little nervous that he'd rather sit in cash than go deal hunting at current market valuations.
It is a little perplexing. Berkshire sold $36.1 billion worth of stocks last quarter, and they bought just $1.5 billion. So that's the 8th straight quarter they've been a net seller of stock. And if you're an investor, you look to Berkshire Hathaway as your North Star. So it is a bit curious, and especially what Buffett said about Apple in May at Berkshire Hathaway annual shareholder meeting. He said Apple was an even better business than Coca-Cola and American Express, which he's often praised. Those are some of his long-term holdings. So what's going on? You know, maybe a part of it is just him being a smart investor and taking some chips off of the table. Like if we're gamblers, we're just keeping going because we're just amateurs. And if Apple hits a certain price and he says, all right, well, that is where I am comfortable with this being. I'm selling now. And there's also some thing to be said about the tax regime that we had talked about. Buffett expects that capital gains taxes will be raised in the coming years, which tax you on your investment earnings when you sell them. So he's selling them now. He's mentioned this to try to get ahead of those tax changes. And then again, Treasury yields are also quite high still, and so he takes all this Apple stock that he sold, all this cash, plows them into T-bills. He's now the largest owner of T-bills anywhere. Even he has more than the Fed, and he's making a nice return on them. So he thinks it's maybe a safer bet than the equities market.
Let's also dive into Berkshire's operating earnings because they did report just their third quarter earnings. They did fall from $10.7 billion a year earlier to $10.1 billion. Remember, this is kind of a nice cross section of the American economy because Berkshire is so big. It owns things from insurance to energy companies. So its actual businesses, which include Amex, Geico, insurance companies, did decline 6%. But a lot of it was kind of chalked up to higher liabilities because if you're in the insurance business, what did we just go through? A really active hurricane season. So Hurricane Helene kind of impacted its earnings bottom line a little bit. So just an interesting time to be at Berkshire Hathaway, though, because just you're sitting on so much cash. Clearly, he doesn't see any good deals out there to deploy it. Warren Buffett is famous for just saying, I'm not going to chase a good deal of a bad company. I'm going to look for good companies, but I don't even know what he could buy these days.
Well, I was looking at it. He has what, $325 billion? He could buy pretty much anything from Netflix on down.
All right, let's get Netflix folded into Berkshire's portfolio. This is feeling like the Mondayest of Mondays right now for TGI Fridays after the chain filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy this weekend. It is a story we have been telling for months now. Casual dining chains have been feeling the heat this year as customers have increasingly opted for quicker and more cost-effective alternatives like Chipotle or Shake Shack. The chain has also found it really hard to bounce back financially from the COVID-19 pandemic. The bankruptcy actually only affects 39 restaurants controlled by TGI Friday's parent company, not the rest of its 56 independent franchisees. So if you're in need of Friday's signature whiskey glazed burger, you will still have options. Neal, TGI Fridays first rose to prominence back in 1965 as one of the first singles bars in the U.S., But now the only relationships it has to worry about are the one between itself and its creditors as it tries to regain a foothold in a restaurant market that is increasingly apathetic to its offerings.
Really is. I mean, but first, let's roll the tape on TGI Fridays, because TGI Fridays, I was not familiar with your game. You popularized a lot of the things that we take granted in the casual restaurant industry. They say they take credit for popularizing the Long Island iced tea, which is a huge hit at these kind of places. They say it's bartenders trained Tom Cruise to make drinks in the 1988 film Cocktail. They say they popularized the concept of happy hour, and they also influenced Office Space, because there's a famous restaurant in Office Space called Tchotchkes where everyone, Jennifer Aniston's character, wears flair, and TGI Fridays did popularize that concept as well. So it is a remarkable institution that has permeated our culture and our restaurant culture in ways that I didn't know about before looking at TGI Fridays when they filed for bankruptcy, ironically enough.
Unfortunately, their story is not unique when you look at the broader restaurant industry landscape right now. I mean, Buca de Beppo is closing down 80 locations. It filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in August. Red Lobster, as we know, filed for Chapter 11 in May, exited it in September. So it's just part of this class of restaurants that people are just increasingly shunning right now. It's both too expensive to compete with kind of maybe the Chipotles of the world. Like maybe the food isn't as good as like the Shake Shacks of the world. So it is just caught in this very messy middle, except for one company we talked about last week, which was Chili's, who has just nailed it. They've threaded the needle very well. They kind of created a dish, an appetizer dish that went viral on social media. So you are struggling right now, but as Chili's shows, you are maybe one dish away, one social media trend away from regaining your foothold in the industry. So maybe TGI Fridays finds its fastball. Maybe people develop a taste for their potato skins again, and we start singing the praises of this once iconic institution. Up next, you know what time it is, winners of the weekend time.
Let's head to our winners of the weekend, the segment where Toby and I pick two things that really took advantage of that extra hour of sleep. I won the pre-show Buffett competition, so I get to go first. And my winners are Nvidia and Sherwin-Williams. These are two companies you don't often hear grouped together, but both of them were selected to enter the exclusive club of 30 stocks in the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Of course, 2 in means 2 out, so Intel and Dow Inc., you're getting the boot. The move is not expected to send shockwaves across these stocks because so few investment funds track the Dow Jones compared to the S&P 500, but it is surely symbolic, especially in the swap of Intel for Nvidia. Intel used to be the king of the chip makers, dominating the market for semiconductors used in personal computers. The introduction of generative AI has shaken up the pecking order. Nvidia's advanced chips used to train AI systems are flying off the shelf, while Intel was caught flat-footed. Nvidia's stock has climbed 170% this year to become the second most valuable company in the U.S. Intel is down almost 40% this year and is now worth just 3% of Nvidia. Toby, the Dow says it reshuffles its index so that its 30 companies provide the most relevant picture of the U.S. economy. Do you think it did that with these moves?
Yeah, it definitely did. I mean, the Dow still stinks, but it is trying to stink a little bit less. First, they added Amazon earlier this year. Now Nvidia's in. So they are trying to catch up to a more tech-forward look at the current economy. That being said, I do just want to shout out Sherwin-Williams a little bit because you talked a lot about Nvidia in that intro, but Sherwin-Williams is a $90 billion paint company. So I was looking into kind of how they revolutionized the paint game over the years. First, they were the first to introduce a resealable paint can, which sounds like common sense, but at the time it was not. First, ready mixed paint as well. And then also they introduced the paint can shaker, which could mix up to 5 gallons of paint at a time. So customers could finally start purchasing more instead of just those small paint cans. So they are not just slinging paint. They have been a leader. They've been an innovator in the paint sector as well. It's got 5,000 stores. So much bigger company than you might have expected. Not quite as big as Nvidia, but I did just want to give a shout out to Sherwin-Williams.
And you threw some shade on the Dow, so we should just explain why you don't think the Dow is a good index, which I would say is very largely accepted by the broader investing community. And that's because it is weighted by share price, not market cap. So whatever company has the bigger share price for whatever reason, maybe you don't don't do a stock split, then you have a higher weighting in the Dow than a much bigger company that just has a smaller share price. So case in point in this is that Sherwin-Williams will now have the 6th largest weighting in the Dow Jones, while Nvidia will have the 22nd largest weight. And Nvidia is a much bigger company than Sherwin-Williams. So I just wanted to explain why the Dow is second tier compared to the S&P 500 as providing a picture of stocks.
What a ridiculous index. I know it's iconic, but there's just no logic to that. My winner of the weekend is actually the second place finisher in the pro women's division of the New York City Marathon, Hellen Obiri. Despite getting edged in the final mile of the race, Obiri turned heads for her footwear. She is a sponsored athlete of On Running, who outfitted her with a new spray-on model called the Cloud Boom Strike LS. On utilizes a robot to literally spray a high-tech material directly onto the midsoles of the shoe, relying on what the New York Times described as a single semi-translucent synthetic monofilament to create the shoe's upper. The result is this back-to-the-future looking boot-like running shoe that is incredibly light, environmentally friendly, and fast. It is weird looking, but Obiri has now won Boston in a prototype, competed in them in the Olympics, and gotten second at New York. So Neal, all I am saying is that I would have run a better time yesterday if I had been rocking some Cloud Boom strikes.
Perhaps. It's very interesting hearing what execs at On are saying about their overall strategy and these shoes in particular. You know, right now they're competing against Nike and Adidas. They are an upstart and they're growing like a weed, but they're still competing against these legacy sneaker makers. And they say we have to innovate because Nike has the Air Jordans, Adidas has the Sambas that they can always fall back on and sell a lot and just keep reissuing them. On is a fairly new company. They don't have those traditional styles. So they say we need to innovate, and they're doing something that is truly innovative in the sneaker industry, which could lead to massive disruption if it were to be commercially successful. And that is the huge question mark, whether this will be commercially adopted. But they have no choice but to innovate and release new styles and new methods that might catch on in order to chase the big guns.
And it's not often that new shoe tech really comes around. I mean, Air Maxes from Nike was one of them at the time, where they injected pressurized air into the back of your midsole. And then the carbon fiber plate in racing shoes, that was another big quantum leap forward. On is trying to really reduce the amount of inputs that go into making a running shoe. They say there's 75% less impact on the environment. The reason being is that typical running shoes have 150 to 200 components that go into making it. The Cloud Boom Strike has only 7 because the entire upper is made out of one single material. And I mean, I'm designing a pickleball shoe right now, and that 150 to 200 number is not an exaggeration. There are so many little pieces that go in. If we could have just painted the upper on, it would have made our lives a lot easier.
Okay, but I feel like we're bearing the lead here. You ran the New York City Marathon yesterday, not in these particular shoes, in other shoes, but how was the experience?
It was incredible. I just want to give a shout out to you all, the listeners. You guys showed out in force. First, I got to give a shout out to Hunter from Australia, who gave me a little pat on the back as he was running by me and said, hey, can I get a shout out on the pod? So there you go. Then also just lots and lots of Let's Rides out there that always gets the blood pumping. Although someone did yell Neal's numbers at me. I was like,
that's right.
I was like, what the heck? How is Neal getting the shout out right now? I also saw some beautiful Morning Brew Daily signs. So there was one really good one that was like stock of the week was Toby, and it was like nice colors. So if you made a sign, like please email us, please send it to us. But truly just want to give a shout out to everyone who showed out. New York, you showed out, and Morning Brew Daily listeners, you showed out as well.
It's Monday, so let's close out the show with some major events you need to know about for the week ahead. Gonna focus on non-election news, since there are, in fact, other things happening in the world. Is the 4th time the charm for Boeing to end its strike. After rejecting the previous 3 offers, 33,000 on-strike machinists will vote today on the company's latest offer to end a 7-week walkout that has frozen its manufacturing operations. The contract in front of employees includes a 38% pay raise, a $12,000 bonus for hourly workers, and bigger contributions to retirement plans over 4 years.
Undoubtedly the most important vote this week. Can't think of anything that surpasses this casting of ballots. But no, this really is important. I mean, costliest American strike this century, $11.5 billion. Boeing is desperate. Need to see what the Iowa Post and Seltzer is saying about it.
Speaking of things that have a large economic impact, the Fed is meeting and is expected to cut rates on Thursday, which would be the second time this year it's lowered borrowing costs to preserve the job market. Remember, the rate cut in September was a meaty cut of 50 basis points. This one looks likely to be that traditional 25 basis point cut. And with that in the bag, investors will be more focused on what Jerome Powell has in store for the rest of the year.
Man, I miss the days when this was the biggest news of the week. We were counting down the days till Jerome Powell's rate cut announcement. Now it's regulated to a week ahead blur. But yes, all signs point towards another, albeit smaller cut.
And just for a rule of thumb, if the job market continues to be strong, that means fewer rate cuts or less rate cuts. And then if the job market is showing signs of collapsing, that means more aggressive rate cuts. Unfortunately, the job report we had on Friday was extremely confusing because of the two hurricanes and the Boeing strike threw things out of the whack. So we don't really know what's going on with the jobs picture. It still looks like the Fed is going to cut by 1/4 of a point. In sports, the road to March Madness starts today with the start of the men's and women's college basketball season. Everyone will be looking up at 7'9" Olivier Roux, a freshman at Florida and the world's tallest teenager.
The guy can dunk a ball easier than I can breathe, but I can also sit in economy. So who's the real winner here?
And if you're not in the holiday spirit already, Mariah Carey has declared it's time. Over the weekend, the singer posted a holiday hype video with a clip from her song, All I Want for Christmas Is You, which is celebrating its 30th birthday this fall.
I mean, I love that she leans into it. Most people would be like too proud to lean into it, but she just every year comes out and it is great. I'm ready for holiday season this year. It's been far too hot.
If you made as much money as she did on this song,
that's true.
You would also lean into it. That is all the time we have. Thanks so much for spending your morning with us. We do appreciate it and have a wonderful start to the week. For any questions, comments, or feedback, send an email to morningbrew.daily@morningbrew.com. And as Mariah Carey said, it's time to start thinking of holiday gifts. And what better gift is there than sharing Morning Brew Daily with your friends and family? It's more creative than socks. Toby, who should our listeners gift Morning Brew Daily with today?
I want you to share the pod with someone who you think should win the New York City Marathon next year. I know you have the itch after seeing everyone lay it out there, but you need a training buddy. So send this pod to that future training partner.
Let's roll the credits. Emily Milliron is our executive producer. Raymond Liu is our producer. Olivia Graham is our associate producer. Uchenna Ogu is our technical director. Billy Menino is on audio. Hair and makeup is ready for that Krispy Kreme tomorrow. Devin Emery is our chief content officer, and our show is a production of Morning Brew.
Great show today, Neal. Let's run it back tomorrow.